The foreclosure notice lay on Grace Wilson's kitchen table like a death sentence. 3 months behind on rent, with winter approaching and prices climbing. She glanced at Michael, her 8-year-old grandson, asleep on the fold-out bed that had been hastily arranged in what should have been their dining area. His small chest rose and fell peacefully, unaware of the financial abyss opening beneath him. Grace traced her fingers over the watercolor painting he'd made at school today, a grand house with turrets and gardens, surrounded by autumn trees. "Our dream home," he'd said with that innocent smile that broke her heart a little more each day. How could she tell him they might not even have this small apartment by Christmas? At 45, Grace Wilson hadn't imagined her life would come to this. And once a respected art teacher at the local high school, she'd taken early retirement to care for Michael after her sister's sudden death 3 years ago. Now she scraped by restoring antique furniture in a rented garage space, her skilled hands bringing beauty back to forgotten pieces while her own life crumbled around her. The clock ticked past midnight when the unexpected letter arrived by special courier. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, with a wax seal bearing a rose insignia. Inside, the letter was brief but life-changing. Grace had inherited Harrington Manor, a Victorian estate in Millbrook, Massachusetts, from her great-aunt Eleanor Harrington, a relative she'd never met. "We have a house, Michael," she whispered the next morning, showing him the photographs included with the letter. "A real house, with a tower and gardens." Michael's eyes widened, his small finger touching the image of the grand Victorian mansion with its weathered stone and ivy-covered walls. "Just like in my picture. Is it magic?" Grace laughed for the first time in months. "Maybe it is, sweetheart. Maybe it is." Sometimes life's greatest gifts arrive when we've given up hope. Where are you listening from today? Leave a comment below and subscribe to hear what Grace and Michael discovered next in their unexpected inheritance. The journey to Millbrook took them through New England countryside, ablaze with autumn colors. Michael pressed his face against the bus window, counting red barns and stone walls while Grace studied the lawyer's letter once more. Eleanor Harrington, her father's aunt, a woman Grace knew only from a single faded photograph in her childhood home. Why would she leave an entire estate to a grandniece she'd never met? Millbrook revealed itself around a bend in the road, a quintessential New England town with white church steeples, colonial buildings, and a main street lined with maple trees shedding golden leaves. But beneath the postcard beauty, Grace noticed the subtle signs of economic struggle. Empty storefronts, faded awnings, and for sale signs in shop windows. "Pretty place," the bus driver commented as they gathered their bags, "though not what it used to be since the mill closed. You folks visiting?" "Actually, we're moving here," Grace replied. "Harrington Manor." The driver's expression shifted, not quite a frown, but something close. "Up on Rose Hill Road. Been empty a long time. Your family of Miss Eleanor, then?" Before Grace could answer, a woman's voice called out from across the street. "You must be Grace Wilson." Martha Reynolds was 70 if she was a day, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and bright eyes that seemed to evaluate Grace in a single glance. "I've been waiting for you. I'm Martha, Eleanor's neighbor for 40 years. Come along now. You both look exhausted. I've got pot roast waiting and plenty to tell you." Martha's cottage sat adjacent to the Harrington property, separated by an ancient stone wall and wrought iron gate almost hidden beneath climbing roses. Over pot roast and apple cider, Martha shared stories of Eleanor Harrington, an accomplished artist who lived quietly but whose paintings had sold in galleries across New England. "She was a remarkable woman," Martha said, passing Michael another serving of mashed potatoes. "Talented, generous, but private. Very private, especially after what happened with the Sterlings." "The Sterlings?" Grace asked. Martha's expression darkened slightly. "Alexander Sterling runs the bank in town. His father Victor and Eleanor had history. Not pleasant history." She glanced at Michael and changed the subject. You'll want to see the house now, I expect. I've kept an eye on it, made sure the basics were maintained. Harrington Manor stood 3 stories tall, its Victorian grandeur faded but unmistakable. Gabled roofs, stained glass windows, a wraparound porch, and the fairy tale tower that had captured Michael's imagination. The grounds had grown wild, gardens overtaken by nature, pathways barely visible beneath fallen leaves, and a small lake reflecting the autumn sky through cattails and rushes. It's like a castle, Michael whispered, his eyes wide as Martha unlocked the massive front door with an ornate key. Inside, time seemed suspended. Furniture draped in white sheets created ghost-like silhouettes in the fading afternoon light. When Grace pulled back the coverings, she revealed exquisite antiques, Queen Anne chairs, Chippendale tables, and hand-knotted Persian rugs faded but still beautiful. Eleanor left everything exactly as it was, Martha explained, switching on lamps that cast warm pools of light against the gathering dusk. She always said the house was waiting for its rightful heir. While Martha showed Michael the kitchen with its vintage cook stove and copper pots, Grace wandered into what must have been Eleanor's studio. Dozens of canvases lined the walls, landscapes, still lifes, and portraits revealing extraordinary talent. But it was one painting that stopped Grace cold, a handsome man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, his portrait larger than the others, in position where sunlight would fall directly upon it. "That's James Montgomery," Martha said softly, appearing in the doorway. "He was special to Eleanor." "He looks familiar somehow," Grace murmured. "You have his eyes," Martha replied, "and Michael has his chin." Before Grace could question this, Michael's excited voice called from the library. "Mom, I found something!" The library was magnificent, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather armchairs, and a massive stone fireplace. Michael knelt on the oriental carpet, pointing to a section where the pattern seemed different. "It moved when I stepped on it," he explained. Grace knelt beside him, running her fingers along the edge of the carpet. When she pulled it back, she revealed oak floorboards inlaid with an intricate rose pattern. At the center of the design, almost invisible against the wood grain, was a small depression. When Grace pressed it, a hidden compartment slid open with a soft click. Inside lay a silver key unlike any Grace had seen before, ornate, with a rose-shaped head and intricate symbols engraved along its length. As she lifted it from its hiding place, headlights swept across the library windows, illuminating the room in harsh white light. "That would be Alexander Sterling," Martha said, her voice tight. "Right on time." Alexander Sterling embodied old money and quiet power. His tailored suit, silver-streaked dark hair, and confident bearing spoke of privilege and authority. His smile never quite reached his cold blue eyes. "Ms. Wilson," he extended his hand, "welcome to Millbrook. I understand you're Eleanor's heir." "Yes," Grace replied, instinctively slipping the silver key into her pocket. "We're just getting settled." "I wanted to introduce myself personally," Sterling said, glancing around the library with the calculating gaze of an assessor. "As president of Millbrook National Bank and chairman of the Historical Preservation Committee, I take a special interest in properties like Harrington Manor." "How thoughtful," Martha murmured, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "Actually," Sterling continued, "I'd like to discuss the possibility of purchasing the property. This house requires substantial resources to maintain properly, resources that might be challenging for a single mother." His gaze lingered on Michael, who had retreated to Grace's side. "I'm prepared to make an extremely generous offer, enough to set you up comfortably anywhere you choose." Grace felt a flicker of temptation. The money would solve everything: Michael's education, their security, a fresh start without financial worry. But something in Sterling's eager expression made her hesitate. "That's very kind," she said carefully, "but we've only just arrived. I couldn't possibly consider selling so soon." Sterling's smile tightened fractionally. "Of course. Take your time settling in. But I should warn you, these old houses harbor secrets, Ms. Wilson. Eleanor Harrington's especially. The financial burden alone can be crushing. Historical preservation requirements, property taxes, maintenance costs. It might be wiser to let someone with experience take on such responsibilities. After he left, Martha's expression was grim. Alexander Sterling has wanted this property for 20 years. His father before him, too. Be careful, Grace. The Sterlings don't take disappointment well. That night, after Michael was asleep in the tower room he'd immediately claimed as his own, Grace sat in the library holding Eleanor's silver key, wondering what doors it might open and what secrets lay waiting behind them. October in Millbrook brought golden light, crimson leaves, and unexpected challenges. Grace secured a part-time position teaching art at the local elementary school, but the salary barely covered groceries, let alone the mounting expenses of Harrington Manor. The ancient heating system sputtered to life reluctantly. The roof leaked in 3 places. The property taxes alone were staggering. The previous owner left enough to cover taxes for 1 year, explained Mr. Blackwell, Eleanor's attorney, during their meeting in his cluttered downtown office. After that, I'm afraid you're on your own. Was there no other inheritance? No life insurance or investments? Grace asked, thinking of the magnificent artwork in the house. Blackwell removed his glasses, polishing them carefully. Eleanor's financial situation was complex. Most of her assets seemed to vanish about 30 years ago, around the time of her estrangement from the Sterlings. There were rumors of substantial hidden resources, but nothing was ever found. In town, Grace quickly learned that being Eleanor Harrington's heir earned her curious glances and whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Michael faced his own challenges at school, returning home one day with a torn backpack and tear-stained cheeks. Tommy Sterling said we're living in a cursed house, he explained, referencing Alexander Sterling's grandson. He said his grandfather told him people who live there disappear or go crazy. Grace held him close. Old houses have stories, sweetheart. That doesn't make them cursed. Yet at night, when wind whistled through the tower and floorboards creaked with the settling of ancient timbers, Grace understood how easily stories could become legends, especially when the house itself seemed determined to reveal its secrets. How many of us have faced starting over with nothing but courage and hope? Have you ever found unexpected strength when it seemed all was lost? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to follow Grace's journey as she uncovers the first of Eleanor's many secrets. The silver key became Grace's obsession. It fit no lock in the house, not the antique cabinets, not the numerous doors, not even the old steamer trunks in the attic. Yet she was certain it was important, particularly after discovering similar rose symbols carved subtly throughout the house, on window frames, door jambs, and stair railings. It's a pattern, she explained to Michael one evening as they made a game of finding the hidden roses, like a trail of breadcrumbs. Martha became their most reliable ally, bringing casseroles and local gossip in equal measure. She introduced Grace to the Millbrook Ladies Historical Society, a group of older women who welcomed her warmly, but exchanged meaningful glances whenever Eleanor's name arose. People still talk about Eleanor and James, explained Harriet Wilson, no relation, the society's 80-year-old president, when Grace finally gathered the courage to ask directly. Such a scandal in those days. James Montgomery, Grace prompted, thinking of the portrait. Who was he to Eleanor? The women exchanged glances before Harriet continued. James was Victor Sterling's business partner and husband to Victor's sister Catherine. They owned the textile mill together, the lifeblood of Millbrook for generations. But James and Eleanor fell in love, deeply, irrevocably in love. An affair, Grace said quietly. More than that, Martha interjected. They had a child together. The revelation landed like a physical blow. A child? A daughter, Harriet confirmed, born while Catherine was conveniently visiting relatives in Europe. When she returned, the baby was presented as Catherine and James's child. Few knew the truth. What happened to the daughter? Grace asked, already suspecting the answer. She was raised as a Montgomery, Martha said gently. Your mother, Grace. The world tilted on its axis. Grace steadied herself against the table, memories rearranging themselves like puzzle pieces. Her mother, who had died when Grace was just 20, had never spoken of her childhood. Grace had always assumed her maternal grandmother was Catherine Montgomery, the cold, distant woman who had rejected her after her mother's death. But that means Eleanor Harrington was your biological grandmother, Martha finished, and James Montgomery was your biological grandfather. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She paced the library, studying James's portrait with new eyes, seeing now the resemblance to her own features, to Michael's. Why had Eleanor never reached out? Why reveal the truth only after death? The answer came at dawn. While examining the rose carvings on the library window frame, Grace noticed they formed a pattern when viewed from a certain angle, a sequence of numbers. On impulse, she arranged books on the shelves according to the numerical pattern. When she placed the final volume, a soft click emanated from behind the fireplace. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a small compartment containing a leather-bound journal. Eleanor's private diary, its pages filled with elegant handwriting, pressed flowers and sketches. Grace read until the sun was high, absorbing the tragic love story of Eleanor and James, their secret meetings, their impossible choices, and the daughter they could never publicly acknowledge. But the most shocking revelations concerned Victor Sterling. According to Eleanor, Victor had discovered their affair and used it as leverage to systematically destroy James. He forced James to sign over business assets, stole patents for textile innovations James had developed, and eventually drove the mill into bankruptcy while establishing a separate company in his own name. James knew what Victor was doing, Eleanor had written, but remained silent to protect me and our daughter from scandal. He sacrificed everything to shield us from public disgrace. The diary ended abruptly in 1985 with a chilling entry. James is gone. The sailing accident was no accident at all. Victor ensured no witnesses survived. I have only one purpose now: justice. Not for myself, but for our granddaughter who will inherit what was stolen. The plan is in motion. The roses will guide her when the time comes. Grace was still absorbing this revelation when Michael burst into the library, eyes wide with excitement. "Mom, I found more roses in the tower. They make a map when the sun shines through them." The tower room's circular design featured windows facing each cardinal direction. As the morning light streamed through the east-facing window, it illuminated tiny rose patterns etched in the glass. The shadows fell on the opposite wall, creating what appeared to be a constellation of connected points. "It's showing us something in the North Garden," Grace realized, comparing the pattern to an old property map she'd found. The garden expedition yielded another key, brass this time, hidden inside a weathered stone angel that guarded what had once been a reflecting pool. This key unlocked a small door in the garden shed, revealing a cache of letters tied with faded ribbon. Before Grace could examine them, she spotted Alexander Sterling watching from the property line, his expression unreadable. That afternoon, the first of many official visitors arrived. A building inspector citing anonymous complaints about structural issues, a tax assessor reviewing the property's valuation, a historical preservation officer concerned about unauthorized modifications. The pattern was unmistakable. Sterling was applying pressure, creating bureaucratic obstacles that would strain Grace's already limited resources. Each inspection generated reports requiring expensive corrections. Each assessment threatened to increase the financial burden. Martha confirmed Grace's suspicions. He did the same to the previous owners. Creates problems, then offers to solve them by buying the property. Most people eventually give in. Why does he want this house so badly? Grace wondered. That, said a new voice, is the real question. Claire Montgomery stood in Martha's doorway, a tall, elegant woman in her 60s with streaks of silver in her auburn hair and penetrating green eyes that assessed Grace carefully. "You must be Eleanor's granddaughter," she said. "I'm Claire Montgomery, James's niece. Or technically, I suppose, we're cousins once removed. I've been waiting for you to find enough pieces to be ready for the rest of the story." Claire had been 16 when James died, old enough to suspect the truth about his accident and to observe the aftermath. Uncle James had been gathering evidence against Victor for years, proof of fraud, embezzlement, even blackmail. The day before he died, he told me he finally had enough to expose everything. But the evidence disappeared with him, Grace surmised. Not disappeared, Claire corrected. Hidden. James knew Victor was watching him. He gave everything to Eleanor for safekeeping. She glanced at Michael, who was playing in Martha's garden. Eleanor spent decades preparing for this moment. For you. The roses aren't just decoration, Grace. They're a map to what was stolen from your family. As days passed, Grace noticed a tall, bearded man often working across the street. Robert Winters, the local carpenter who was restoring the old Millbrook Gazette building. Their paths crossed at the hardware store, where Grace was purchasing supplies for minor repairs she could manage herself. Harrington Manor's a special place, he commented, helping her select the proper type of wood putty for the library windowsills. Glad to see it occupied again. It's more work than I expected, Grace admitted. Robert's smile was warm, reaching his eyes in a way Alexander Sterling's never did. Old houses are like that, demanding but worth the effort. I could take a look at that roof for you, if you'd like. Grace hesitated, wary of accepting help from strangers, but there was something reassuringly solid about Robert. I can't afford to hire anyone right now. Not offering professionally, he clarified, just being neighborly. That evening, Claire helped Grace and Michael decode more of Eleanor's clues. The diary mentions the heart of the house, Claire noted. In Victorian architecture, that typically means the library fireplace, Grace finished, remembering the hidden compartment where they'd found the journal. Together, they discovered that both keys, silver and brass, fit into nearly invisible keyholes on opposite sides of the massive fireplace. When turned simultaneously, they activated a hidden mechanism that caused the entire hearth to swing inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending beneath the house. The hidden chamber beneath Harrington Manor took Grace's breath away, not with grandeur, but with purpose. Stone walls lined with filing cabinets, tables covered with maps and documents, a vintage typewriter beside stacks of correspondence. In the center stood an antique desk that had clearly been James Montgomery's, his monogram stationery still in the drawer. Eleanor called it the archive, Claire explained as they carefully examined the contents. James documented everything, every fraudulent contract, every stolen patent, every instance of blackmail and intimidation the Sterlings used against their victims. Not just our family, Grace realized, spreading out documents that detailed decades of Sterling family crimes against dozens of business owners throughout New England. But it was a small wall safe that contained the most shocking discovery, Eleanor's true will and trust documents establishing that the Harrington Montgomery fortune had been hidden for decades. Eleanor established a foundation in the 1980s, Claire explained. On paper, it appears to be a modest arts organization. In reality, it controls assets worth over $200 million. The accumulated value of James's patents, investments, and properties that Victor Sterling stole. $200 million? Grace sank into the desk chair, stunned. The house was never Alexander's target, Claire continued. He wants to prevent these documents from coming to light. They would destroy what remains of the Sterling family reputation and fortune. Grace found a sealed envelope addressed to her in Eleanor's handwriting. And inside was a letter and a newspaper clipping from 5 years earlier, reporting Eleanor's accidental fall down the mansion's main staircase. I fear my time grows short, Eleanor had written. Alexander has been watching the house more frequently. Last week my brake lines were tampered with. Fortunately, discovered before any accident could occur. I've made arrangements with Martha and Claire to protect the archive until you arrive. When you read this, know that if anything happens to me, it was no accident. Just as James's sailing mishap was deliberate, Victor sabotaged the boat, ensuring no survivors could contradict the official story. She knew Alexander might kill her, Grace whispered, horrified. That's why she installed this, Martha said, indicating an ancient-looking telephone mounted on the wall. Direct line to the sheriff's office installed after James died. Part of what she called her insurance policy. As they examined the evidence, Grace realized Eleanor had spent decades methodically reclaiming what the Sterlings had stolen, acquiring shares in companies through shell corporations, buying properties through third parties, rebuilding the Montgomery legacy piece by piece. But why wait so long to reveal everything, Grace wondered. She needed the right heir, Claire explained. Someone who would understand that wealth without purpose is meaningless. That night, Robert helped Grace secure the house, reinforcing doors and checking windows. Their shoulders brushed as they worked side by side, a moment of connection that brought unexpected warmth. "Thank you," Grace said simply, "for not asking questions." "Sometimes people need space to solve their own mysteries," he replied, his steady gaze meeting hers. "But if you need backup, I'm just across the street." His presence proved providential the very next day when Alexander Sterling arrived with an eviction notice, claiming irregularities in Eleanor's will. "This is absurd," Grace protested. Michael pressed against her side as Sterling and two associates pushed their way into the foyer. "The courts will decide that," Sterling replied smoothly. "Meanwhile, I suggest you pack essentials. You have 48 hours to vacate." Robert appeared behind Sterling, his tall frame filling the doorway. "Everything all right here, Grace?" Sterling's expression hardened. "This is private business, Winters." "Nothing's private in Millbrook," Robert replied evenly, "especially when it involves intimidating a widow and child." The standoff might have escalated further if Sheriff Davis hadn't chosen that moment to arrive, summoned by Martha, who had witnessed Sterling's aggressive entrance from her cottage. "Mr. Sterling," the sheriff began, "that document requires proper service. You can't just barge in and make demands." Sterling retreated, but his parting glance at Grace contained unmistakable menace. "This isn't over. That house contains property that legally belongs to my family." After he left, Sheriff Davis examined the eviction notice. "This won't hold up. Blackwell's the executor of Eleanor's estate. He'd have mentioned any issues with the will." "Alexander's desperate," Claire observed. "He knows we're getting close." That night, as a storm battered the old mansion, Grace awoke to the sound of breaking glass. Downstairs, flashlight beams cut through darkness. Intruders. She woke Michael, whispering urgent instructions to hide in the secret passage they'd discovered between his room and the attic. Barefoot and terrified, Grace crept down the servant's staircase, finding Robert already inside. He'd seen the break-in from his workshop across the street. Together, they watched from the shadows as Sterling and two men systematically searched the library, moving furniture and checking behind books. "It has to be here somewhere," Sterling muttered. "She would have kept proof." When they began prying at the fireplace mantel, Grace realized they were dangerously close to discovering the entrance to the archive. She squeezed Robert's hand and whispered, "Get Martha. Tell her to activate Eleanor's insurance policy." As Robert slipped away, Grace deliberately made a noise, drawing attention away from the fireplace. Sterling spun toward her, flashlight beam catching her face. "Ms. Wilson, how convenient. Save us all some trouble and tell me where Eleanor hid James's documents." "I don't know what you're talking about," Grace replied, playing for time. Sterling's laugh held no humor. "Please, Eleanor spent decades preparing for this moment. She would have left instructions, clues. The roses, perhaps?" At Grace's startled expression, he smiled coldly. "Yes, we noticed those. My father suspected Eleanor was hiding something important after James's unfortunate accident." "You mean after your father murdered him?" Grace said, finding courage in anger. Sterling's expression hardened. "My father protected our family interests, just as I protected them when Eleanor became troublesome 5 years ago." "You killed her," Grace breathed, "pushed her down the stairs to make it look like an accident. She was 82 with a heart condition. No one questioned it." Sterling stepped closer. just as no one will question when an old house with faulty wiring catches fire with its new occupants inside. One of Sterling's men held up a gas can, the implications chillingly clear. But before he could act, the library was suddenly flooded with red and blue lights as police cruisers surrounded the house, sirens wailing. "What the?" Sterling began. Martha's voice came through an ancient intercom system hidden in the library wall. "Eleanor's insurance policy, Alexander. She installed silent alarms throughout the house after your father killed James, and she made sure the sheriff knew exactly who to suspect if anything happened here." As officers entered with weapons drawn, Sterling lunged toward the fireplace, desperate to reach the hidden entrance. In the struggle that followed, he struck Grace, sending her crashing into a bookshelf. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was Robert rushing to her side and Michael appearing from his hiding place, the silver key clutched in his small hand. Grace awoke in the hospital with Michael asleep in a chair beside her, Robert keeping watch from the doorway. "Sterling?" she asked weakly. "Under arrest," Robert confirmed. "Breaking and entering, assault, attempted arson. And those are just the preliminary charges." When Sheriff Davis arrived to take her statement, he brought unexpected news. "We found something interesting when we searched Sterling's home office. Documentation about Eleanor's death. Evidence of premeditation. The district attorney is considering upgrading the charges to include homicide." Over the following weeks, as Grace recovered, the full extent of the Sterling family's crimes came to light. The evidence in the archive revealed a pattern of fraud, blackmail, and intimidation spanning generations. Several of Sterling's former associates turned state's evidence, revealing a network of corruption that had strangled Millbrook's economy for decades. James would finally have justice, Claire said, helping Grace organize the archive documents for state investigators. "His name will be cleared. People will know the truth about what he created and what was stolen from him." The Harrington Montgomery Foundation was reorganized with Grace as director, its mission refocused on supporting arts education and providing legal assistance to victims of financial fraud. The old textile mill was purchased for renovation as an art center and museum, celebrating James Montgomery's innovations and Millbrook's industrial heritage. Most surprising was Tommy Sterling's response to his grandfather's arrest. The boy sought out Michael at school, awkwardly apologizing for his earlier bullying. "My mom says Grandpa did bad things," he explained. "She says we have to make things right." The boy's tentative friendship symbolized the healing that was beginning throughout Millbrook. With low-interest loans from the foundation, shops reopened on Main Street. Community projects restored the town square. For the first time in decades, Millbrook looked toward the future, rather than mourning its past. Spring transformed Harrington Manor. Gardens bloomed where weeds had once ruled. Fresh paint brightened weathered clapboards. The tower room's stained glass windows gleamed in the afternoon sun, casting rainbow patterns across Michael's art table, where he worked on his latest watercolor. Robert had become a constant presence, his quiet strength a counterpoint to the chaos of the preceding months. Their friendship had deepened naturally into something more, a connection Grace hadn't believed possible after years of focusing solely on Michael's needs. "The porch swing is fixed," he announced one evening, joining Grace and Michael for dinner, now a regular occurrence, ready for proper spring sitting. Later, with Michael asleep and Claire returned to her home in Boston, Grace and Robert sat in the repaired swing, watching fireflies rise from the garden like earthbound stars. "I found Eleanor's final letter today," Grace said, unfolding delicate paper. The handwriting was Eleanor's, elegant even in her final days. "My dearest Grace, if you are reading this, you found your way home at last. The journey wasn't easy, I know. Truth rarely travels a straight path. The fortune waiting for you isn't measured only in dollars, though there are plenty to ensure your security. The real treasure is knowing you come from love. Imperfect, complicated love that faced impossible choices, but love nonetheless. James and I had only brief years together, but we created something lasting. Your mother, and through her, you and Michael." Family endures beyond death, beyond lies, beyond the schemes of men who mistake wealth for worth. The roses have guided you home. Now it's your turn to bloom where you're planted, to create beauty from brokenness, and to remember that the greatest inheritance is the courage to love, despite the cost. Forever in your corner, Eleanor. Martha wiped a tear from her weathered cheek. She waited so long for this moment, to see justice done, to know her family was secure. I think she sees us, Grace said softly, looking up at the stars emerging in the twilight sky. I hope she knows we found more than just the money. We found where we belong. Robert's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, warm and steady. Tomorrow would bring the formal dedication of the James Montgomery Museum of Innovation, where his restored portrait would hang beside a newly discovered painting of Eleanor. Together at last, their expressions conveying a love that had transcended betrayal, separation, and death itself. The silver key rested in Grace's other hand, catching the last golden light of day. No longer a mystery, but a reminder that some doors can only be unlocked when we're ready to face what waits on the other side. Eleanor had known this. She had prepared the way, left the breadcrumbs, trusted that when the time came, love would find its way home. In the growing darkness, Harrington Manor stood solid against the night, its windows glowing with warm light, a beacon of welcome to all who sought shelter within its walls. Not a house of secrets anymore, but a home where truth had finally set its inhabitants free. Sometimes the greatest treasures aren't the ones we find, but the people we become while searching. What treasures have you discovered in unexpected places? Share your story in the comments and subscribe to hear more tales of courage, restoration, and second chances. Thank you for joining Grace and Michael on their journey home.